Today on LawNext, a conversation with Mark Harris, the co-founder and former CEO of the legal talent marketplace Axiom, and now CEO of the Axiom spinoff Knowable, which provides technology to give large enterprises greater visibility into their contracts. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. We'll get to today's interview in just a moment. But first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview. Mark Harris, welcome to LawNext.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Where in the world are you today? You're based in New York, right?
My geography has always been a little bit confusing, but I'm based in California.
Okay.
When I was more active with Axiom, and certainly when I was the CEO, I lived bi-coastally. We spend our summers as a family on the East Coast, and then but our kids are in school here, so we're based here. And now that we're kind of entering a new chapter, I'm here more often than not.
All right. Well, I want to talk about what you're doing now and talk about Knowable. But is it okay if we kind of go backward a little bit and then move forward from there?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to your founding of Axiom in 2000. 19 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. What was the vision for the company? What did you set out to do when you and Alec Cattell started Axiom?
Well, interestingly, maybe I'll sort of get to this, but I feel in many ways where Axiom is headed now is closer to the vision from 20 years ago than where we've been for the last 20 years. But the inspiration for the business came a little bit from all of the things that were happening around us at that moment in time. And you have to get your head sort of stuck back into 1999, 2000. The internet was kind of coming alive for the first time as a sort of wellspring of entrepreneurship and opportunity, and Industry Standard magazine and all that was happening sort of pre the April 2000 collapse. And so, Axiom came a little bit from all of that, and pieces of inspiration from kind of Dan Pink and Free Agent Nation sort of thinking, early kind of startups in that space like Guru.com, which was founded by James Slavitt, who's now a good friend of mine, kind of co-runs Greylock Capital. And I think there was another company called freeagent.com that ended up going public. You had Elance, companies like that. And so part of the inspiration came from there. Part of it came from just, I was at Davis Polk. I was a, kind of junior associate there. I was making a lot of observations from the inside around what wasn't working and what was broken in the industry. So it was a combination of those things, and what emerged was this idea for an internet-enabled marketplace for freelance legal talent. We knew it would have to be a little bit different than a lot of what existed because of the quirks of the legal industry and the inherent conservatism. So our notion was a more kind of closed loop, kind of curated talent platform or talent marketplace, and had to be a bit more high touch and manual at first. That was kind of the idea. I would say that we had probably more appreciation, more of a fine-tuned appreciation for the problem we were solving than we did exactly for how we were going to solve it. And I think that turned out to be a probably a good thing because we weren't overly attached, and the reality of, taking a company from a business plan to on the journey to becoming a real business with some critical mass is that you make many adjustments and constantly iterate.
So was the problem staffing? Was the problem people? What exactly was the problem that you wanted to solve?
Yeah, no. The problem wasn't. The problem was how legal services were bought and delivered, and at that moment in time, there weren't a lot of options, and there wasn't really anything happening from an innovation standpoint in the industry. And so, you had all this stuff happening in all of these other industries, and just probably overstated claims of imminent disruption and the role of the internet and and information technology on all of these knowledge-based industries. So I think kind of the background was, the question really became kind of, in a world where everyone's trying so hard to be efficient, why do law firms get to be so inefficient? A question my co-founder Alec asked me in one of our first breakfast meetings was, why is everyone in this industry so miserable? Which was something that hadn't
that hasn't changed.
Yeah. And it's actually somewhat validated by studies and science at this point. But it was an interesting question. And as we took a step back, we said, look, everybody kind of gets that, the corporate clients are kind of perennially unhappy and dissatisfied, and they have been for the 2 decades that we've been working in this industry. And it's because legal services are so expensive, and there's so much friction involved with the delivery of the service, and it seems so clunky and kind of out of touch with the modern world. But here I was sitting on the inside of a big white shoe law firm in New York City, and I didn't know any lawyers who felt underworked or overpaid. The lawyers were pretty unhappy too, and so we said, look, if you have two parties to an exchange, and one party's really unhappy, but the other party's fine, more or less satisfied. Well, in our society, we call that a bad bargain. But if you have two parties to an exchange and both leave fundamentally unhappy, that's not a bad bargain. That's a bad exchange. So how can we take that exchange apart and put it back together in a way that's more sensible and accounts for advancements and the way we do things and in technology, and just leave everyone better off? And that was sort of at the heart of the Axiom adventure, and we felt like we could go right at the stake of this industry and take on kind of the delivery model for high-end legal services and provide a real alternative that sat between in-house departments on the one hand and really expensive law firms on the other. And there really wasn't anything occupying that space in the year 2000.
I mean, it must have been a little bit of a tough sell in the early days. So people had not heard of this kind of a concept before.
Oh, yes. You wouldn't believe how hard it was. I mean, I could not overstate the just people looked at us like we were completely crazy. We'd show up in these meetings, and the meetings themselves were hard enough to get. And then if we got an audience with the general counsel of a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company, it was just there was curiosity, I think, because there was a lot of curiosity in that moment in time, and kind of ideas had a outsized currency. But at the same time, they just would look at us and say, well, who the hell are you guys? You're two 30-year-old guys, haven't done anything in their lives, and you want to be you're going to come with this kind of new contraption and try to serve Goldman Sachs or General Electric. How is that going to work? And it took a long time, a lot of banging heads against walls, and a little bit of luck and timing and everything else.
Yeah. What was the point when you realized you were gaining the traction that you needed, or you felt like you reached a turning point in terms of the certainty of the future of the company?
Well, there were in those days, you sort of, I think you measure it more by, are we going to survive or not? So there were a lot of moments where it was not clear we were going to survive. And then when we did, we thought, oh, we might actually, this thing, we may make it. And by the way, that also, you have to sort of put yourself in that time, because just about every startup we knew flickered out of existence. And, not long after kind of the NASDAQ collapse, and then you had 9/11 in 2001, and the, economy really, hit a rough patch there for a year and a half, couple of years. And so, it was kind of a tough moment. There were, some very close calls. I think what happened was, because the environment was so rough, general counsel were under a lot of pressure to reduce costs. And so there was a different level of openness to kind of doing things differently. And so we did get a number of meetings across kind of 01 and 02. We weren't really getting any business out of those meetings. We kind of got in a habit of bringing office supplies back to as kind of like our only bounty.
Right. Like taking the shampoo home from the
we'd
hotel.
impress people with all the legal pads and the pens that we took from the conference room. But in early 2003, just as we were kind of getting to the end of our reserves, something somewhat miraculous happened, and the phone rang. And I think up until that point, I don't think whatever little bits of business we won, we kind of won them on the spot. And, these phones that we had in our office, I think we forgot that they kind of worked both ways. We were calling out a lot, but it was unusual to see one of them ring. And then all of a sudden, in early 03, they started ringing, and it turned out that, all those general counsels we met and their leadership teams, and all the pitches we made, and the stories we told, and the things that we previewed, they stuck with people and made a little bit better impression than we probably thought. It's just that there wasn't a ton of work because we were in the depths of a recession. So as we started to come out of it, people remembered, and all of a sudden we started getting phone calls, and really the business flipped almost overnight. I mean, it went from, I would say we sort of 3 or 4x the business in a matter of 3 or 4 months in terms of run rate. In 2003, we turned our first profit in April 2003, and it had been a long, hard 3 years up until that point, with a lot of stress and fear of what could happen. And so we piled everybody that worked at Axiom into a van, and we divvied up the profits, not for Alec and me, but for everybody else on the team. We basically handed out all the profits. We drove up to Atlantic City and spent the night gambling our profits away.
Hopefully not in the Trump casino.
No, I don't remember actually, but I doubt it. But I think, we came back to work that next Monday, and we were busy. And we just were busy then for the next 4 or 5 years. The company kind of doubled every, or better year on year for 4 or 5 years straight. And then we kind of, before we knew it, we looked up and we had a business.
That's great. I mean, it's interesting because people were talking about you from the start. I mean, you were getting coverage, you were getting press from pretty early on, as I recall.
Yeah.
So it's hard, as an outsider to know how much of that translates into actual business and traction and whatever else is going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Yeah.
No, I just say there wasn't a lot else to talk about in the legal industry back then. So
that's true.
We benefited from from that probably. But yeah, I would
Not
say
as much
anything
as
that
there is
you
to
read
talk about these days.
anything that you read before 2003, 2004 was more a function of that than our sort of prowess out in the market. But I would always say that Axiom has kind of benefited from maybe more mind share than market share. But we were pretty careful not to try to overtell the story until we felt like we actually had something. And I think we did a decent job of really protecting our credibility in the market and becoming a sort of a trusted source for what's new and different in the legal industry. And then as things really did start to take off, I think at that point we then started to really get a lot of attention, and that was nice, and I think fortunate for us.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by what you said early on in this conversation, which is that you, in some ways, feel like Axiom is closer today to your original vision than it was when you were starting out. How is that?
Well, I think by function of these spinning these other businesses out, because I think
so it's back to its purer form. In a sense.
That's exactly the word that was on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, it's a more purist sort of interpretation of the original, vision, and now that we've gotten to, now that Axiom has gotten to scale, and it's weird I'm using we. I just recently stepped off the board. I'm now just a cheerleader and a co-investor in Axiom.
Oh, you're no longer executive chairman?
No, I'm not. I just resigned. So
you're still listed on the website as such.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's incredibly recent. But in the post Primera ownership, I'm here to root on the company and I'm super excited about where it's headed and about all the, I've got all these amazing people and friends and talented ex-colleagues that are going to make the most of that opportunity, and I'm betting on it financially. But I would say,
it's been a transitional year for Axiom. The year kind of started with this spin-off. And maybe it started with other stuff behind the scenes. But in February, it was announced that there had been this decision to spin off Knowable, which is where you are now as CEO, and also the managed services component that it had developed in recent years into Axiom Managed Services.
Yeah.
What drove those decisions? Why was it decided to spin those off?
Well, I think first you have to go back to why did we get into those businesses in the first place?
Right. Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, and that was really you came out of kind of 2000. So we went on this run that I just mentioned for a handful of years, and then all of a sudden, we had our next big challenge, which is the financial markets imploded in 2008. The economy started pulling apart, and so we had to sort of take a step back strategically and ask ourselves what was our way through this, and where was the opportunity in here for Axiom, and we had we really wanted to, as I said from the outset, we wanted to help the industry get radically more efficient. We wanted to change the delivery model for legal services. We saw a real opportunity in 2008, 2009, in the sort of beginning of that recessionary period, to do much more sort of at scale, significant things for our clients, and we felt we could access a differentiated level of share of wallet. And but the way through that was to take on much bigger things, and basically create this managed services business where we were no longer just helping our clients access legal talent in a much more efficient way, which we would refer to at the time as sort of the who of legal services, but that we were going to change the way the work was actually done and delivered, which was the how of legal services. And so a lot of our talent platform engagements were in the contract space, probably 40 to 50% of them. So we had come to understand how large
due diligence type scenarios.
Not really due diligence, more like just our lawyers were drafting and negotiating commercial contracts of all kinds. So we were kind of an elastic sort of, either an overflow valve or just a sort of penumbra kind of function for a lot of these large law departments that needed sort of elasticity in dealing with commercial contracts. And we were a lot less expensive than spilling that over to a law firm, and we were more flexible, and we had really talented people. So it was a good alternative to building up your in-house department. And so we had kind of come to understand the contracting function in a way we felt that nobody else understood it in the marketplace. And we saw a lot of opportunities to improve upon the way these functions were managed, particularly at scale. And so that led to us starting in that period proposing around a kind of more holistic solution where we take over a significant portion of the internal function and take over all of the work that was going outside. And we do it in our ecosystem, kind of in our centers with our people, with purpose-built process and tools and technology that we thought would allow us to deliver that service at a more cost-effective, but also a faster and more accurate manner. And that proposition, resonated. And so next thing we knew, we had the talent platform, and then we had this thing we were calling the contracts platform. And the contracts platform over, a sort of number of years, seven or 8 years grew from nothing to about 100 million in sales, and was, about a third of the business, or a quarter of the business. And as we kind of rounded the corner coming into 2019, and it was its own thing, and so but it was a very different thing, really, than the talent platform. It required different capabilities, different talent, different kinds of forward investment. And it turned out that within the contracts platform, there were really two different businesses. There was the managed services business, which was really an outsourcing business, running contracting functions or a portion of them. And then there was what became Knowable, which was really a contracts data analytics business. And that wanted to be really more of a sort of SaaS model. Managed services is kind of a tech-enabled services business, and then the original Axiom was a marketplace business model. And so all of a sudden, inside a relatively, not a big company, or relatively small, medium-sized business, 400 million in sales, we were running three different businesses, three different business models, and the complexity of that, we felt like we were suboptimizing all of them.
Yeah. And was it also, I mean, there was talk as of last February when you spun off these separate businesses, there was talk potentially of Axiom positioning itself for an IPO. Was that part of the business reason for doing this?
It was. I would say it was secondary. The primary was focus. We had been struggling with this for some time. It felt like for the 3 or so years prior to the spin decision, we kept making deliberate, explicit decisions to kind of further focus what we were doing and where we were putting our emphasis, which meant de-emphasizing certain parts of the businesses, and particularly in managed services, where we just actually started shutting down sales motions. and so we were in a much more conservative sort of preservation mode with that part of our business, just because it was so hard to execute across all three and to kind of fund all three businesses at once. And so so I say first and foremost, it was about focus, but yeah, we also had we'd been around at that point for, as you said, 18, 19 years, and we had a fairly legacy shareholder base that had been in the business for a long time, and we needed to start kind of opening up some pathways to liquidity. And so the idea of getting Axiom public, the core business, which once you pulled the contracts platform kind of apart and away from the business, really had the characteristics of a more maturely operating company that was still had a ton of addressable market and a attractive growth rate, and it just made for what we thought would be a good public company. And so we put that on the path to becoming public. We filed the S1, which was public information, and we spun the two businesses out, and we went about helping them find their next homes. And so that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And as for, and you alluded to this, but just with regard to for listeners who haven't followed this, Axiom since announced that it was receiving a significant strategic investment from a private equity firm, Permira, and I guess that means any talk of an IPO is off the table right now, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, again, I have just stepped off the board. I mean, that effectively was an acquisition of the company. Permira really owns the business now. A number of us chose to, roll forward and co-invest, including the team and myself, and some other investors. But the reality is that we're not doing that anytime soon. But I honestly, going forward, I don't know, and I won't have a say in that. I wouldn't shock me if one day Axiom became public, but I think this is going to be really good for the company. They're going to get to make some forward investments and do some things that otherwise are more difficult as public.
Yeah. So all of which gets us in part to the reason we're here today to talk about Knowable. We haven't really talked enough about it yet at this point, but I mean, Knowable is, as I understand it, is based on technology that you initially developed within Axiom, and then you had this platform, this product that you've spun off. What exactly is it? What do you do?
Yeah, well, it started somewhat reactively, just helping our clients make sense of all the information that's sitting in their contracts, typically triggered by an event. So M&A is kind of the classic example, but if you're General Electric, which is a customer of ours that's been in a pretty significant disposition posture for the last couple of years, or you're some other company that is acquiring another company. There's a lot of reasons you need to understand what's in your contracts or what's in the contracts that you're inheriting. So the acquisition context is pretty easy to understand. You've acquired a company, you're in kind of your post-merger integration phase. You now have 30, 40,000 new contracts that have just been added to your corpus. You need to, really reconcile all of the rights and responsibilities, the obligations, the entitlements that are sitting in that corpus, and understand them relative often to what you have today. So it could be really, some of it is really basic executional stuff, like what notices are required, what kind of consents and assignments do we have to go get. But a lot of it is much more sophisticated than that, kind of really understanding your IP rights, understanding sort of, where you are relative to renewals of customer engagements and cross-sell opportunities. Where can you consolidate your supplier base to the extent you're sharing suppliers, who has the better terms, what, all of those things. So there are hundreds of questions that come up in that context, just like there are hundreds of questions that come up every day in a really large company about stuff that's in their contracts and in terms of decisions that need to be made. And so we started helping our clients do that. We started initially just doing it in a fairly kind of manual way. We grew that business.
And weren't you also using some third party? I mean, you were working with Kira, I know, at some point.
Yeah, we were. We introduced. So we basically built kind of Knowable runs, well, to our knowledge anyway, the world's kind of largest operation for translating these very prose-heavy contracts into structured data. And the structured data is important because that's off the back of structured data, you could run reports and analytics and really provide kind of insights to what's in a company's contracts and portfolio of agreements in a way that you could never do with prose, because with prose you just have to open up PDF and kind of read it, one contract at a time. And so we build a proprietary kind of set of tools and a process for being able to do this with people, as fast as you and accurately as you possibly could in the beginning of the business. ML is a pretty interesting tool for this this kind of activity. What Kira is really good at is helping lawyers be more efficient and move faster. So in this context, Kira can help you identify the clause that you're looking for, help you know where it sits in the agreement, and so you don't have to go searching through it. But the lawyer still has to read the clause, interpret it basically, and reduce it to to a data element. And so we wanted to go further than that. And we felt we had some pretty interesting, kind of powerful assets, which I can tell you about in a second, that made sense for us to sort of build our own machine learning models. And our models are not only helping to make the sort of analysts that are, translating the contracts from prose into data more efficient, but we're trying to automate as much of that activity as possible. So the models are actually not only saying this is the assignment clause, but this is what the assignment clause says. This contract is assignable in whole or in part or what have you.
Yeah. Well, I'll take the bait. What were those assets? I mean, you mentioned that you had some pretty strong assets that enabled you to develop that. What were those?
Yeah, it's just by virtue of running this, this operation, that, again, I think it sort of has a scale that we don't know anybody else that does exactly this. This is all we do day in, day out, is translate contracts prose into data. So that sort of service offering, which has been pretty fast growing, has gotten to a decent size. That puts us in possession of two things. One is rare. The other is, I think, unprecedented. And so the rare thing is we're working with the heads of contracts and the general counsels and the head of M&A often in these really large companies, and we because of the very work we're doing, we have access to all these contracts. And M&A is nice because it brings a broad cross section of agreements, really all the agreements that you would have in a corpus. And so one of the things that kind of tech only, sort of AI and machine learning only tools, one of the ways in which they're limited is they don't have great content to go train their tools on. So a number of them come to us rather regularly and say, hey, can we get access to these contracts that you have so that we can train our tool? So the first thing,
a number of your competitors, you mean, or others in other areas of contract?
The Kiras of the world. Remember, I mean, they weren't really competitors. There's
right.
sort of competitors now.
Yeah,
but not,
there are some in your space that are trying to do what you're doing, or at least that's what they say they're doing.
Yeah, and so I mean, again, we're coming at this from a different angle. We're not a tool only provider, but But the tool only providers would come to us and say, can we get access to those contracts? Because we want to, we're trying to train our models. And it's hard to get access. How do you do it if you're a sort of AI only kind of tool provider? How are you going to get tens of thousands of agreements from the largest companies in the world to train up your technology? So that's difficult, but we're not the only ones that have that, but that puts us in rare company. The thing that we have that is, I think, extra powerful is that we not only have the raw contracts, but we have the answers. So we've been doing this for years now. So just last year, for instance, I think we reduced, kind of the prose-based clause to a data element 60 million times. This year, it'll probably be closer to 100 million. Every time you do that, if you could just create a mental picture in your mind of a kind of text-based contract kind of on the left. So take an assignment clause again, 100 or so words. And then basically the data element on the right that tells you what that clause says. So let's just say assignable in whole or in part. So we will have done that 100 million times this year. The way that machine learning works is obviously it needs to learn, and you need to be able to train it. Typically, you'd have people training it. You would take the raw contract and then you'd basically say, yes, this is an assignment clause. Is this an assignment clause? Yes or no. Click. Is it assignable? Yes or no. Click. On and on like that. We have 100 million instances that basically say on the left, here is the prose-based version, the starting place, and on the right, here is the answer. And so the machine learns from that pattern recognition of seeing the starting place of the prose-based clause on the left and the answer on the right. And it's one thing, to have that a few times, but if you have it, thousands of times or tens of thousands of times or millions of times, or getting close to 100 million times, now you're at a sort of you're at a sort of repetition rate where actually you can really begin to progress the accuracy and the efficacy of these ML models so that you can automate more and more of that work. And I just think we're in a really unique position, given the training data that we have. And, we're doing our best to take advantage of that and to really, position ourselves to be able to do more and more of this work on an automated basis, which can really drive down the economics. It's a pretty expensive undertaking today to translate all this contracts prose into data. The game is worth the skin because there's incredible reward and very valuable business cases on the other end, but most people don't have millions of dollars sitting around, ready to be spent unless there's like an M&A event or some other event that comes with budget. And so we're trying to use the tool to drive down the cost so that people can have access to this information all of the time, not just in an extraordinary event.
Yeah. So you're developing big data on contract data. That's what it comes down to.
Well, I think I think of it as small data. But big data is, directionally kind of accurate answers, sort of, tell you kind of where things are sort of pointing. The thing about contract data is that you directionally accurate in legal will get you fired. And so you need precision accuracy.
Right.
And that's why I don't think you're ever going to get people out of the sort of solution here, out of the answer. So we have a human in the loop model where we're able to deliver 98% accuracy. So the combination of more accurate ML models with a different delivery model that verifies, because only humans actually can verify accuracy. The machine cannot tell you whether or not it's been accurate. It can tell you its confidence levels. Right. You have to validate that with human beings. And so in a world where you have to have precision accuracy. And it's really at a very granular level, like contract clause level or subclause level. It's really a sort of small data concept, and how do you get to accuracy in a way that doesn't break the bank?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So in your model, in your human in the loop model, where are the humans? Are you providing the humans, or are the humans on the client side, the customer side?
No, we have them. They're in our environment, in our sort of secure centers, and working on kind of with our tools and our IP that we've kind of developed over the last several years. We have a really powerful complementary sort of workflow technology that works hand in glove with the ML, so they're benefiting from the combination of those tools, and we have a center today in Chicago, and we have one in Wrocław in Poland.
We'll get back to my interview in just a moment, but first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, let's continue this week's interview. In July, you announced a joint venture with LexisNexis. What does that mean? How are you? I assume that, of course, means investment by LexisNexis in your company. But what's that relationship look like?
Well, so far it's been amazing. We're admittedly in the honeymoon phase, but we couldn't be happier about LexisNexis as a partner. Really sort of talented, smart, engaged group of people across the sort of senior levels of that team that we engage with on a more regular basis. One thing we used to say in the early days of Axiom is that we wanted to work with, not just with customers who need what we have, but with customers who believe what we believe. Which we borrowed that from Simon Sinek, but we're really, really committed to that idea. When you're trying to innovate in an industry such as the $500 billion legal industry, you can waste a lot of time with customers who don't really believe what you believe. And our job was really to facilitate the people who wanted to innovate. LexisNexis is a company that wants to innovate. They believe what we believe about the future of contracts data and the power of analytics. LexisNexis as a part of the RELX group has been on this really impressive sort of transformational journey over the last few years, from information services to really becoming a data analytics business. I think they see a huge opportunity here in kind of the transactional side of the legal industry and in contracts. They're really savvy and sophisticated about it, and they're really committed to helping us bring it to life. They bring a ton of scale and resource, and so far so good.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the analytics that I'm familiar with that they've been involved in so far have been on the litigation side.
Yeah.
And they've been sort of talking about extending more into the transactional side. And this clearly, you can see the potential for why this makes a lot of sense for them. What does it mean for your customers that you have this joint venture? What's the advantage for them, if any?
Well, I think it starts with just we've got a lot more wherewithal. So we've gone from being part of a 400 million, small, under-attended to sort of service offering in a $400 million business to then a sort of standalone company, the sort of as a small, really small kind of early stage business. And all of a sudden now we're part of a, $47 billion market cap company group and RELX group. And a juggernaut in the legal industry and LexisNexis. So we've got a lot of um, resource behind us, real commitment, and I think that is a helpful thing for our kind of customer base, which is right now mostly made up of really large enterprises, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 types. I think that's a kind of comforting and reassuring thing. In addition to that, though, we're just starting to get our heads around all the possibilities and the synergies. LexisNexis is sitting on just a world-class supply of legal content. There are, I think, lots of ways to kind of marry what they have with what we're doing and the sort of raw assets we have in a way that delivers kind of more, solutions that are more rounded and more potent for our customers. And the tricky part for us will be, just staying focused on kind of putting one foot in front of the other, because we've got a lot to do to just be excellent at what we do today. And to drive adoption and a sort of change in the way in which customers think about contracts data and how powerful it is and how to harness it. So, some of these things I think probably come a little bit down the track for us as we get bigger and are looking to enrich our sort of suite of offerings. But there's a lot of possibility there.
We started out talking about what your vision had been 19 years ago for Axiom. What is your vision now for Knowable? Where do you want to see this company go?
Well, I really believe that this is just a unlimited upside sort of type opportunity. I really believe that structured contracts data, the movement from prose to data, the movement from analog contracts to digital contracts is totally inevitable. It's worth tens of billions of dollars, that opportunity. I really think it can be a complete game changer for our customers, and in particular for general counsel who really are the custodial owners of the contracts and all this information that's sitting within them. And so it really positions the general counsel's office to be quite heroic in unlocking and unleashing all types of value for the corporation. So I think we need to play our part in helping to create this category. I really see Knowable as a future market leader in this space. Market leadership is really important to us. We want to be able to set the tone and the standard and the pace at which this part of the legal industry moves forward. It's hard to, Bob, I'm sure it's almost impossible to say exactly how it's going to go or what it'll mean. Yeah. But I would say that I think as early as 5-6 years from now, we will look back on this moment in time and think it's almost impossible to believe that we could not access all of this mission critical information that is sitting in our contracts that we need every day to be able to make the most basic of decisions, to be able to comply with regulations, to be able to satisfy the obligations we have, or to make sure that we realize, the value that's and the entitlements that we have in all of our contracts. I think it'll look crazy that we had contracts that weren't fully digitized. So anyway, I really think we're 5-6 years away from that kind of realization. Exactly how far we'll be in terms of manifesting all of the possibilities and value and all of that stuff, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, does harnessing that intelligence? I mean, you talk about yourself as an intelligence solution for enterprises. Does harnessing that intelligence open new possibilities for your technology to do more than just help companies understand their contract, but to also help them, negotiate, realize, manage, execute? I mean, get beyond just intelligence.
Totally. We like hokey catchphrases, and so I think one of the ways we think about sort of the promise of digital contracting is, understand contracts without reading them, create contracts without writing them, and one of our kind of as our CTO, so one of our sort of epics is it's contracts without reading and writing. So I would say you're talking about what does it mean for the creation of contracts. We're starting with understanding the contracts you have. And there are all sorts of reasons for why we think it's better for us to start there. And it's a powerful place to start. But as you begin to understand what's in the contracts you have, you're immediately enabled and empowered to do much better with the next incremental contract that you create, because you have so much more information, understanding around the positions you take, the positions your recurring counterparties take, what makes sense for you, how effective you are at getting those positions. Are you, for instance, a big pharma company that is trying to get through a clinical trial process as quickly as possible, and every extra day you spend in the trial costs you $1 million. So every day you can take out of the contracting cycle saves you $1 million. How many days or how many weeks are you wasting fighting for positions you get 23% of the time? And if you're going to land on a position 77% of the time, maybe you should just start there. And you can save yourselves weeks and millions of dollars, and that's across one contract, let alone tens of thousands in a single trial. And so there's all sorts of ways in which you can harness this intelligence to be better in the contracting process, but you can also start to fast forward in your minds to a place where contracts really, we move away from prose more to sort of contracts really look like structured data. They look more like a term sheet, really, with all of the different, what we call we call our data models position models, but it's really the positions you care about. It's not the 150-page of sort of Shakespearean flourish that's written around them that is more
Right.
Kind of vestigial to another point in time. And so I think that the more this becomes automated, the more these contracts become structured, the more people get comfortable kind of with thinking about them as a collection of data, as opposed to sort of a big block of prose. I think that the way in which contracts are constructed and created can be meaningfully automated and streamlined. And I see that as kind of the next chapter once we figure out how to make this first chapter work and just helping people understand what they already have.
Well, we'll be staying tuned on your first chapter and all further chapters beyond that. Mark Harris, I really appreciate your taking the time to come on LawNext and have this conversation with me today.
It was great to be here. I enjoyed it, and thanks so much.
We've been talking with Mark Harris, the co-founder and former CEO of Axiom, and now the CEO of the Axiom spinoff Knowable. Big thanks to Mark for taking the time to be with us today. And as always, thanks to the producer and editor who gets this show on the air, Bob Ambrogi. That's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.